Good afternoon, everybody. You must be, you've sat through a number of talks which have been extremely inspiring. I'm going to talk about something which is very dear to my heart. And the girl who introduced me said just now, I begin with the Conservation Society of Delhi, because when they asked me for a topic for the lecture, I scribbled down conversations with the past. And I remembered how very often when we were typing things, those were the days of typewriters, the Conservation Society is 1982, we used to often by mistake type Conversation Society, then I had to clean it up. So, but it struck me that it's not a bad word, that conservation is something serious. It's about seeing that old buildings are kept in good shape and to create public awareness about them. But conversing with them, talking to the monuments, is something that I think we really have to learn to do. Just think for a moment. When you go to a monument, you are taken around, if you have a guide, or you have a guidebook. I mean, the classic story is of English tourists who walk around with a guidebook and read it all the way and never even look at the monument. So there are situations like that when you're learning about it, but you don't have time to appreciate it. And usually these things are done rather quickly, and you're through with it, and you've ticked it off as seen, and usually being photographed with it. Can't we go beyond this a bit? And I would like to link this with the fact that most children get very bored, and they don't have any hesitation in saying so, are very bored with history. You must have been through it, or your children have. And this boredom extends itself to museums and to monuments. You go through it wondering when it'll end, and you hear the tinkle of teacups in the distance. You know there's a cafe there, and you wonder how much longer. So there is something seriously wrong in the fact that a country like ours, with a long history, with large gaps in it admittedly, but still an extraordinarily long history, has no sense of excitement about the past. Incidentally, children, particularly little children, and even older ones, often say they love archaeology. Now give this a thought. They like archaeology, but they dislike history. That's because archaeology, they visualize doing, digging, finding something, finding that pot of gold or finding a skeleton or whatever. That is discovery. They want to do that. But they don't want to be taken around and shown things in glass cases or at a site and being told that X or Y built it and this here. So they don't want to be taught, they want to discover. So can we change things about a bit so that we're less patronizing to children? Now, what are the questions we ask or address when we go to a monument? The usual when, who, where, and of course what. What, its name is given. Who, the name of the king, who or the whichever aristocrat who patronized it, who wanted it built or paid for it. Where, the location. And when, the date. So it's little wonder the children say history is boring, it's full of facts and dates. Now, instead of being embarrassed about your child, you should pay serious attention to this remark and realize this is not important, this is a given. But the more information you give them, you're moving further and further often into boredom. T.S. Eliot once said this, and I think it's a very beautiful line. Where is the wisdom we have lost to knowledge? Where is the knowledge we've lost in information? So we have quantities of information. You can go to it. You can always check anything you want, the magic of the worldwide net. And there are books, there are illustrated books, aplenty. There's plenty to read. But I don't think that is what I want to talk about, because that is a resource we all have. I want to think of which question we do not think of, apart from the when, where, how, what, and whichever, who. There are two other questions: how and why. How meaning how was it built, and why was it built in this particular form? And that is one thing that we don't really bother to talk about. And that is what will open the doors to discovery, which will make people interested in it, see it as, see old buildings, whether it's forts or temples or places of worship or palaces such as they are, or even what is called vernacular buildings, that is the Havelis of people who, which have got deserted, or some of them have become gentrified and made very beautiful. How do we address them? How do we look at them? So the need is for time and attention. The patron who's building this is looking down from the great height, not falling over a precipice or looking over a precipice perhaps, but from a mountaintop. He's a powerful man. But the person who's building it is looking upwards. He's the humble man. None of these architects, very, very seldom, do you have the architects or artisans leaving their names. In the Qutb, inside the stones, I mean the stones which you view from inside the Qutb, you often have what are called artisans' marks. That is, they use little signatures for themselves. You get this in many places where there are, in a kind of shorthand fashion, they would write their names or their initials. But they were doing that just for convenience. They were not doing it to say, look, I built this. Sometimes there are places where particularly with painting, where the artist puts in a little picture of himself in the general crowd of pictures. You see a man standing with an easel and with a paintbrush and say, oh, that's him. But he doesn't give his name. So we're still not sure. So we'll never know. Where in Europe, you can point to buildings from the 12th century and know who the architects were. Not so in India. So we fall back on the king who's commissioned it. Now the point is to get to a point when you talk to the architect and to the various people who help him. You might be knowing this, but the tradition in India was that you have what is called the Panchala, that is the 5 smiths, the goldsmith, the stone maker, person who worked in stone, the metal worker, the bricklayer, and I always forget one. So you have these different categories of specialists working in harmony. They work together, they discuss things, they change things, they adapt their designs. So it is a work of creative art done with the cooperation of a lot of people. It's not one person laying down a blueprint and saying, follow this. So then you come on to seeing what the things are that they're sculpting, what is the stone they're using. How many young people can tell us what the stone is that is used in North India? What is the stone used in Rajasthan? What varieties of sandstone and, not limestone, so sandstone and granite and this thing, what's it called? Quartzite. And when you get to Bengal, for instance, you get brick temples because there's hardly any strong stone there. So you have them made in brick or in terracotta, which is mud. You get to South India, to Kerala, you have small scale buildings because that fits in with the landscape. And in Tamil Nadu, which is a flat country, you get tall gopurams so that the pilgrim coming from very far off can recognize it and head that way. So think of all this. The artist is playing it, not being God, but creating with a sense of purpose and a dedication, not for the money that he's receiving, but because he wants to do the best. There is a story which I've heard repeated in various places, very far from each other. It's a parable rather than a story about an architect who, this I first heard in Konark, that he builds this the tall structure, the shikhara, and at the end he says, no, something has gone wrong and I can't figure it out. And a young man comes along and says, will you permit me to help? And he says, yes, but who are you? He says, doesn't matter, let me see. And he fixes it. Then he finds out it is his own son. He'd been away from home for so long, he'd forgotten what the sun looked like. Now, the same story is repeated elsewhere. The whole idea is to tell you that the father's skill continues in the child, because these were all family traditions, and that it's only his own son who could correct him, which also is another Sanskrit shloka. So it says that you should be proud of being defeated by your son, because your son should be better than you. So there's all these stories of groups of artisans. Who are the Vishwakarma? The Vishwakarma is now a caste, but essentially, if you read the Mahabharata, there are two people in it. There is Maya and there is Vishwakarma. Maya helps him to build Indraprastha, and he comes up and says very humbly, I am the Vishwakarma of the Asuras. The Asuras were in, this is another debate, so I won't go into it in great length. The inhabitants of South India, they were earlier inhabitants, and Vishwakarmas of the Aryans. So these are symbolic figures. What I'm trying to tell you is that architects had a very major place in society. I mean, they were, the traditional thing to do was to say we are as near the Brahmins as possible, which is what they did. But not today. Today, you still have the difference between the architect, whose name is known for having designed the building, which is more than we had in earlier times, but you'll never know about all the workers. You'll never know how many workers died in the building the skyscraper. So, but at least let us go back to the past. That's a human story, but for the past, let us get to know of the skills they had. And this was the time when you had a kind of tandem working of mind and heart, of hand and heart. Today, alas, I think we use our fingers chiefly for tapping very gently on our smartphones. But just think of the limbs we were given and how they were used. I mean, I don't know, but I think it's very important to learn a craft which you have to do and do badly and get frustrated and then learn to improve on it. It makes all the difference to your self-esteem. It's much better than passing exams or getting medals at that level. That's a sidetrack. So that's one thing. The other thing is to understand the beauty of the thing, because aesthetics is something we forget. We talk of buildings as though they are just anything, a factory or something like that, which is efficient. These buildings were most of them done A, scientifically, and B, with a great sense of beauty. And it is so inbuilt that you have to experience it. You have to see it at different times of day. Is it more beautiful? Look at the direction of our buildings, the orientation, facing east, opening to the east, king on the west, and see what it means in terms of the morning light. See what it means in terms of the sunset. We were told yesterday that the sunset from the roof of this building is very spectacular, and the sunrise from the grounds behind us. So these are things one should think of. Think of the stars, the sky, which was full of stars which people could see, which were also figured in their calculations. So our architecture is something that young people should learn to understand and become friends with, and see it in terms of crafts, of art. And I mean, you remember the kind of paints they used, if you're talking of visual art. These were all natural dyes and not the artificial ones we use today. And in terms of gardens, laying out of gardens, the kind of trees and flowers they used. Just do all this. It is not something that you have to do for a degree. It is simply to make your life more full and enjoy it. And here you are best placed for this in Nimrana, where you have the gateway to all Rajasthan's architecture open to you. Please, I hope that you will be able to take this further and see how you can. You don't have to build the same things again. Don't copy old art, that is a sacrilege, but at least you can come to appreciate them and see how at different times of our history these things were handled, and these were done, and with no sense of time or money, but simply that of the joy of creation. And so well, you should think of yourselves as not just citizens of the Republic of India, but as belonging to the Republic of Beauty that is our country. Thank you.